I'm Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans. I do have a little bit that I'm going to talk about, but I'm just going to incorporate it directly into our sitting. I don't usually tell my stories during sittings, but today it just dovetails so nicely into the practical application. I'll do it that way today, okay? Why don't we go ahead and get started? I always like to begin by imagining that I am suspended from the ceiling by a string attached to the top of my head. As a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. And if there is any tension in the body or the mind right now, that's completely fine. We don't need to fight with it. We don't need to argue with it. We don't need to try to force it somewhere or away. We can simply allow it to be here, and we can allow it to leave in its own time, which may or may not be today. And I also like to notice what is in contact with the floor, the chair, the cushion. So there's a sense of grounding. Something is holding us up, and we can allow it to do so. Let's just take a moment to notice this feeling of support or grounding at the bottom, and this gentle lift at the top. And whatever else we have brought with us here today, exactly as it is. Now, there was a day, a number of years ago, when I showed up to one of my yoga classes a little early. And I had come straight from work. My job was in IT. And it had been a stressful day. And when I arrived at the yoga studio, I rolled out my mat and I sat down. There were some other people in the room waiting for class to begin. And I was still feeling very stressed out. A lot of inner turmoil. I could feel it mentally, I could feel it physically, emotionally. And there were various people throughout the room starting to do some gentle poses, some of them perhaps lying down. And out of everyone in the room, one of the yoga teachers, who was going to be taking the class with us and was over on the other side of the room, he comes walking over to me and he says, "You are the most chill person in this room, sitting here like the Buddha." Now, this guy didn't even know I practiced meditation, was interested in Buddhism, anything. And I was flabbergasted. because I felt anything but chill at that moment. And I said as much to him. I said, if you could see the kind of turmoil that was going on inside of me right now, you probably wouldn't say that. And he said, well, the outside reflects the inside. I was like, huh. Around that time, I had been reading some Buddhist texts that contained this short phrase. They do not lament over the past. They yearn not for what is to come. They maintain themselves in the present. Thus their complexion is serene. And suddenly that took on a whole new meaning for me. I realized it's incredibly easy to mistake that person looks serene for that person is serene. And I realized we have a couple of misconceptions about serenity. The first and more common one, I think, at least for me, is that we think serenity means we don't have any problems. Now, if that was the case, I don't think anyone in history would have looked serene yet, right? As humans, we always have some kind of a problem, usually the ones we make for ourselves. And sometimes we also interpret it to mean, oh, okay, maybe I need to just force myself to look serene, and then serenity will follow. But we can't force serenity. The same way we can't force tension away, like I was mentioning when we first started. Trying to force tension away is just bringing tension to tension. So we can't force serenity. Doesn't make sense. We can only set the conditions for serenity to arise. Just like when I said, we can allow tension to be here and leave in its own time. And what I came to realize was, at the time of this yoga class, I'd been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for a number of years. And I realized that I had simply grown so accustomed to making space for turmoil, like the turmoil I was feeling at that moment, that the evidence of it literally was not spilling out of me into my body language or my complexion, which was apparently, to this yoga teacher, according to him, was serene. It's not that I didn't have any problems. I had simply learned how to change my relationship with what it was like to have problems. So he was quite right when he said that the outside reflects the inside. But my outside wasn't reflecting an inside of no problems. It was a reflection of my inner capacity to relate to my problems in a more skillful way. If we can only be happy when things are a certain way, well, how stable is our happiness? So serenity isn't a matter of everything being okay. It's a matter of being okay with things not always being okay. That doesn't mean we don't make changes when changes are warranted to improve situations, but sometimes we don't have that option. Sometimes our best option is to simply be with the turmoil and let it express, let it process, rather than interfering. And we can do this by working with the breathing. Breathing is a process with which we don't have to interfere. We can, but we don't have to. Let's take a couple of minutes and simply make space for the breathing as it is arising and passing. And see if we can just notice it as the process that it is. Very often when we're going through a period of turmoil, which often accompanies a period of growth, one of the reasons that we struggle is because it's uncomfortable. We don't like discomfort. We'll do just about anything to avoid discomfort. But my very first teacher years ago said something that's always stuck with me. Said sometimes comfort isn't what's required. If we're always avoiding discomfort while living in these bodies on this planet with other people, that we're going to experience discomfort. It's going to happen. Are we going to find peace? Are we going to find serenity if we're constantly running from discomfort? Probably not. If we can begin to open to the sensations, perceptions, the experience, feelings of discomfort, they become less uncomfortable as they become more familiar. And then we don't have to run so much. And then ironically, some of them end up in our comfort zone. They lose that power that we have given them over us. And suddenly that power becomes ours. This is that changing of the relationship. That allows us to experience a genuine happiness, real serenity that isn't dependent upon external conditions meeting our requirements for them. Let's notice whatever is coming up in the breathing, or perhaps in the body, perhaps in the mind, for the next few moments, and simply make space for it. Breathe with it, perhaps around it, perhaps through it. If it's comfortable, great, we notice it's comfortable. If it's uncomfortable, we notice it's uncomfortable. Perhaps parts of it are comfortable and parts of it are not. But like everything else, that comfort or discomfort isn't a static thing. It's a process. And we can make space for that process to unfold without interference. as you go through the rest of your day. I invite you to remember to come to your breathing and make space for it, however it is, and to notice what's coming up. Perhaps in relation to thinking, perhaps in relation to something from the outside, job, a relationship. And notice that whatever is coming up is a process. And it's a process that we can watch. It's a process we can make space for. And we can see what happens when it unfolds without interference in that space that we have made for it. And we have unlimited space for that. If it needs more space, give it more space. And engage in that process of inquiry. Because that's how we learn. That's how we learn how to set the conditions for a genuine serenity to arise in its own time. In its own time.